All right, we're going to jump back into it. So just a quick introduction. My name is Kate Whitcomb. I'm a partner with Hacks in San Francisco. So this is my broader team you've seen up here. So Ben and Cyril and Sean are all my partners in crime. And we invest in hardware startups specifically. So we live and breathe robotics, enterprise, health tech, and consumer startups. So there's a lot of familiar faces in the room, which is awesome. But our perspective is typically on the side of teams who have just gotten off the ground. They've just launched their first product. They're trying to figure out how to raise money, go to market, all that great stuff. So I work with about 30 to 40 startups a year who would be absolutely terrified to speak with most people in this room. So that's kind of the perspective that I'm coming at this from is I think the level of knowledge everyone here has and the perspectives are super valuable. So I'm going to kind of phrase a lot of this as thinking about this from the point of view of the startup. What do you do next? How do you think about all of this? So this panel is kind of the transition point in between the last one, which is kind of an overview of corporate dev and how those teams think about making transactions, to the insights that John's going to offer. And the perfect halfway point in between those two topics is the point of view of the sheriff of all of this, who are the CFOs. So the group that we have here is representative of kind of that financial part of the organization. And I'm going to have everybody do quick introductions so you know the context that they're coming from.
Hey, my name is Samak, so I would introduce myself as a startup CFO. I was until recently a CFO of Withings, which got acquired and then divested by Nokia. And I've done myself a number of transactions back in Europe as a startup CFO, acquiring myself companies cross-border in Germany, and then selling the company also to Lagardère. So yeah, startup CFO.
I'm Christina, LaMontagne with Johnson & Johnson. I'm responsible for our health technology corporate development work here in San Francisco. So across our business and consumer medical device and pharma, when there's a digital target, I will get involved. Prior to this, I was an early employee at fintech company NerdWallet here in the city, grew it to about 150 million, and before that was on the venture side. You may have noticed I am not a CFO. And so just briefly, I think I was included in this panel because I have a number of tools in my toolkit. Corporate development for me involves M&A for sure, but also partnerships and business development, as well as advising on investment deals, and try to be very strategic using M&A as a growth tool, as opposed to being more of a transaction engineer.
All right, thank you. Dan Fairfax, so former CFO of Brocade Communications. When I go back through my career, about a third of my career was spent as CFO with venture-backed companies. So these companies, the time they need a CFO typically is when they're generating revenues, looking to scale up, maybe need additional rounds of financing. And then the last dozen years as public company CFO, where both on the buy side and on the sell side, either divesting assets that were acquired earlier when the strategy changed, or the whole company itself, which is quite interesting process as well.
All right. Thank you all for being here. So you can see a really good variety of perspectives that we have right now. So kind of for all three of you, a topic that comes a little bit from the last group, but given the rise in the number of M&A transactions lately, how do you think about taming your organization when they have an idea for an acquisition and they want to go after something? How do you think about, does this strategically align, or are we just super excited about what this is right now, and are we experiencing massive FOMO? And are we going to jump on this because it seems exciting, it seems hot? So maybe, Dan, you've kind of seen everything over time kind of rise up the ranks of acquisition after acquisition. How do you steer everybody?
A couple of things I'd say is, well, to put in perspective Brocade, so we had a team, corp dev team of about, corp dev was part of the CTO office, so the entire team was 10 individuals led by our CTO, half corp dev, half technologists. And so that worked really well from our standpoint of finding deal flow, staying in touch with the market, et cetera. But at the end of the day, they weren't going to run the business. If we made the acquisition, it needed to have a business owner. And so everyone on the team had a role. if we couldn't find a business owner, despite the enthusiasm of corp dev for how great the deal would be, we would have to walk on. And as CFO, I find many times, hey, the corp dev guys might want to do a jump shift, spend all their time in the CEO's office or try to get to board members, but we had to be very disciplined about that. Ultimately, when I was using my business card, I had to think about my core constituents. And always, there's this conversation at the board level or a committee of the board where the question comes to the CFO, which is, hey, we've listened to the strategy. Of course, there's a lot of enthusiasm about that, but what do you think? Is this creative? Does it accomplish what we think? Does the model make sense? And I always had to be prepared for that. And then on the investor side, we're a $2.5 billion company, but every acquisition we made, whether we were disclosing the name or talking about it very publicly, they could see in our financials that we were doing something. And they always wanted to know, why are you doing that? Where is it going to lead you? Is it transformative? Does it allow you to scale? So as CFO, I had to be able to be very crisp and not equivocal about telling that story. So those were the acid tests for me, which was board and the investor community.
I mean, in my experience, of course, I didn't have a corporate dev team with me at Legit, my previous startup in Europe. So we did acquire 2 companies, but with very little capital, as you can imagine. So this is then very clear on the financial side. It just has to work out quite quickly for the acquisition to be worth the time. And I totally agree by the earlier remark about the size of the deal doesn't determine how much time you have to spend or how much complexity there is. So this is all the most true when you have just a couple of people working on the whole deal flow.
And does it ever come down to either of you to put your foot down and say, this doesn't make any sense, you people are insane? Yeah. A lot of head shaking.
If you can't deliver the financial numbers to support it, it dies on the table.
And Anne, I think I saw on your LinkedIn profile you wrote that you were a CFO and sparring partner to the CEO in your last role, and maybe that helps to kind of describe what that situation can sometimes come to when you're truly kind of defending the business in the financial sense.
Yes, I think that relationship is key and has been central to my role in my previous company as well. And it kind of evolves into some kind of a friendship, although despite the conflicts. But that's the trust needs to be there, that's for sure, to be able to argue in a positive manner.
Yep. And I want to move to the topic of speed really quickly. This comes up a lot with, for us as an investor and an accelerator, we move our teams very quickly through development milestones to help them be ready to go to market and to fundraise. Christina, I know this comes up for you probably fairly frequently in the topic of, do we look at teams outside of what we're doing, or do we do this ourselves? How do you navigate that, and how in your role do you help kind of guide the broader team to making a decision?
Sure. Writ large, M&A can be quite a risky proposition. I'm sure you've all seen that. So if there are opportunities to instead capture the right type of value via building ourselves or partnering, you often aim to do that first. That said, in an organization like mine, which is world-class in life sciences and in scientific innovation, but not necessarily in technology development and innovation, when we do have a digital solution that we would like to bring to market, we do often look outside. And so if we feel that it is something that is critical to own and we don't feel that we can build it ourselves, which is, again, often the case in technology, that's the way that we turn.
And do you think it's actually true that startups still generally work faster than most corporates, or have you seen kind of that be matched recently?
Yes, I think is my quick answer there. Having spent a lot of time on the startup side, but there are good reasons why startups can move much faster than large companies. Obviously, large companies have scale and often more oversight than smaller companies. So it's not necessarily a ding on either side, but I have built many models that price in the lag to market if we were to build it ourselves versus the premium we ought to pay to do it now. So that's almost always a consideration in a technology deal.
Right. and then the opportunity cost of not missing out on potentially going down that path.
That's right.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So kind of thinking about the point of view that you've all seen once you've made an acquisition or integrating a company once you've been on that side. We've all seen the TV show Silicon Valley, and we all can picture the kind of disenfranchised founding team sitting on the roof deck, enjoying the view and not working as hard as they said they would. How do you culturally think about integrations and keeping teams motivated? And I think I'd love to hear your perspectives as opposed to the perspectives in the last panel. How do you think about that from the financial management standpoint?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, the good news is there's been so many M&As in the world that like the best practice of the basics need to be done are often there. I say often because I've seen times where there's not that. So, the reverse takeover story, the incentive plan, the retention plan, which can be either, selective or very wide, are often there, and they were there in the deals I've witnessed. But then, of course, you have the culture aspect that comes into it, and that's much harder. And in my experience, and culture shock can come between small companies. So at Legid, when we acquired the Microsoft business in price comparison, and it was an 80 people team in Germany, we were 100 people. You kind of think we were both small and nimble, but there was still a very large culture shock. And to overcome that, I haven't seen anything work better than having role models across the organization on both parts and at all levels. And that's how to have that. So, yeah.
And would that, in some ways, be like an internal stakeholder who's kind of a mentor to the incoming CEO, and kind of creating a matchmake almost when they arrive?
So no, I think it has really to come from the teams from within and from the people that can be role models for others that are already in the organizations on both sides.
Yeah. My approach is that integration planning needs to really start very, very early on in the process, almost from the very beginning. You'll see these Gantt charts that are around developing a thesis, and then internal alignment, and then landscaping, and then like 12 months later, you're working on integration. But actually, that's really not the way it happens in practice, and it's certainly not the best practice to do it like that. So, testing from day one, how are the companies going to fit together, and do we have the same vision is so important. And then another tactic I often use is actually stepping back. It is my role to develop a great relationship with the founding team, but it is even more so important for the sponsor, the person who owns the P&L, to have a great relationship with that founding team, because they are the ones that are going to be working together. Often the founders or the key execs will be reporting into that person. And so it actually does everyone a disservice if I'm the one, holding that relationship too close. I need to make sure that the two of them are on the same page and moving forward.
And just to double click on that topic for a second, what happens, I've heard this come up a lot frequently actually, when the sponsor leaves, or if there's that turnover, how does an organization, I know that's not necessarily a CFO related question, but have you seen that happen? Have you seen that work out well?
It's certainly a challenge, and so while I've put immediate emphasis on that one-on-one or two-on-one relationship, it obviously needs to extend beyond the rest of that close-knit group. And so I think that's part of why at a company like ours, for example, there's quite an involved approval process, so that if one person leaves, the business unit on the whole is still supportive, even if that one person walked away.
Yeah, I think our experience we had a very, I call it fine-tuned, we were doing regular acquisitions until we did a bigger deal. And then the debt load just caused us to be out of the market for about 5 years. Over that time frame, that the recipe was lost, so to speak. So we started doing smaller deals and then another larger deal. And my observation as CFO was the following: Our corp dev people love to go for the kill, but they didn't like to stay around for the butchering and making the deal productive. And that was one of the key things that our earlier team really did well. The corp dev team followed it through, and you need that strong sponsor, but the sponsor and the acquisition target, they will not always agree. And you need someone who has corporate authority, ideal if the CEO is involved, but someone who can make those decisions and keep things moving forward. But I think having corp dev continue to follow it through, but the sponsor own, in a way to resolve quickly the disputes, whether it's around incentive packages, how the model's going to work, et cetera, is really, really important.
And we heard kind of Natasha mention earlier that her team is really good at being incentivized on the follow through and making sure the integration works and the sale, the sales teams are properly integrated. Dan, have you seen any good incentive packages work for the acquired company that have helped that process go more smoothly?
Well, we were always really focused on maintaining the team, and then again, I think the same thing Todd said. If someone really doesn't want to be there, don't lay a lot of money at their feet trying to get them to stay. They usually create just bad blood in the organization. Better to cut them loose, pay them a fair amount, let them go. But on the other side, when we thought we had successful plans in place at the point of acquisition, say it's a pre-revenue development company, what we found was the targets they give us, and we'd always say, hey, what should the targets be, would be against what they were developing before the acquisition. And one of my frustrations was we go and measure that, but as they get involved and integrated into our business, what they're doing now has changed dramatically. And many times they're not meeting those targets. And hey, even as CFO, I want to pay them the money, but they haven't met the targets. So now you're backpedaling. You don't want to lose the people, but you're looking at, do I recut this? Do I roll the money forward? It gets really messy. So I think being really clear on, hey, how is that going to integrate? What's likely to happen downstream? And build enough flexibility in those incentive plans that they have a reasonable shot to get paid, even if things don't go quite right, is really, really important to keeping everyone happy and moving forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. And probably some emphasis on keeping everybody happy, so things.
Well, you don't want to see you've laid a lot of money out, and now okay, it's some cost, but you really don't want to see the key assets walk out the door.
Yep. And kind of, I guess, on that topic, and anything or any stories you're able to share with us from your experience with the Withings integration with Nokia, and when performance wasn't as it was kind of thought to be, any feelings on how that went internally? That must have been interesting to have a front seat.
Yeah, I mean, so as I said or implied, at Nokia, everything was done right from day one in terms of integration and putting people in the decision places, etc. We lost our champion very early on in the deal, so that didn't help, right? And then it's really a matter of strategic shift that happened at Nokia. Nokia wanted to have their brand back into the consumer hands with a health focus, and that's what, we did that in less than 12 months. The Nokia brand is on our products, so that was success, right? And then strategic change down the road, and they decided to divest, but
you could probably write a book on this. The whole story is
thinking about it.
Yeah. Not a bad idea. I'd buy it. So just a quick question. Actually, this is a great question for both of you. The topic of getting into new technology spaces through an M&A strategy instead of through organic building out your R&D team and going down a hiring path. I think that has gone successfully, has gone not successfully for certain companies. Any best practices that you've seen on, I know J&J went into consumer tech through kind of a partnership methodology. Have you seen things that have worked really well for J&J in that respect, or ways that J&J could have improved the process from the beginning?
Yeah, change is very hard, obviously, but J&J is a very old company. We're actually over 100 years old, and that's a great sustainable story. Many tech companies have come and gone in that period. What I've spent a lot of my time on at J&J in the last year or so is developing some thought leadership and playbooks for our executives to think about the value of doing technology acquisitions. We are very acquisitive. So that's not a challenge at J&J, but it is embracing a different set of value drivers for a particular deal. So here in the Valley, we're very comfortable and fluent in maybe what you would drive that two-person acqui-hire deal versus what would drive an acquisition of a pre-revenue company that had incredible data or incredible user engagement or whatever it might be. That's really hard for a much larger CPG/life sciences company to wrap their head around. And so the approach I've taken is to try to really lay a foundation of how we're going to approach tech M&A, such that when we have each individual opportunity, we get it. We're on the same page instead of having to have those conversations over and over again about why are we doing this. Now, it's not always easy, and that's just the way it goes. But I will say that J&J has now successfully acquired at least a handful of tech companies. They haven't yet been, in the billion range, but they've been quite sizable deals across our portfolio, and we just have to reflect and learn. Integration goes different, value drivers need to go differently. So it's a process, but you have to just get started.
And I think our experience was really along the lines of, if it was something that allowed an existing business to scale, relatively easy to align it with the core group, because the DNA was similar. So we always focused our business on high performance networking. If it was a high performance networking target, the engineers worked well together. The sales force could easily bring the products into the portfolio and talk to the customer set because it resonated. It was part of the DNA. In our business, we started to see a major shift to moving away from proprietary hardware platforms for switching, and we saw that legitimately you can bring networking onto a standard server with software. Now, our engineers had never done that. They weren't Linux programmers. They worked on our proprietary ASICs.